like a police interview. I don't really know what I'm going to call this talk, but I sort of let's try this for a starter. God doesn't really argue. So we'll see how we go with that. Let's go to John chapter 1. John chapter 1 and in verse 45. Is there a clock I can zoom in on somewhere? There is one at the back there, isn't there? Well, I've got one on my phone here. I'm good. Philip findeth Nathanael and saith unto him, We have found him of whom Moses in the law and the prophets did write, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph. And Nathanael said unto him, Can there any good thing come out of Nazareth? Now, I just want to pause here for a minute. We've got a cynical man. And we come up against cynical people. I think Kathy was probably not a cynical person, but she was certainly not very positive about anything to do with God or churches at all. And so for her to be persuaded, I believed, took a bit of trickery on my part. But that's my way. That's not necessarily how God does things, but our relationship had broken up, and she did need to be sorted out because, she obviously had her problems. Just kidding. There wasn't a real coming together about the topic of God. And I had always felt that we needed to be one on that. Bring up kids, what's the target? And we just couldn't. I mean, I look back at it, and what I took her to the Church of Christ was, when you know what it can be like, and you think, and I'm going to take her to that, there was just nothing there. There was just nothing. And for anybody who's been involved in a church where there's no Holy Ghost and the Spirit's not moving, people are not being healed, lives are not being changed, and we're just doing church because your parents did it, and you're suffering long. And how was I going to win this lively, energetic girl that loved doing things into sitting for an hour in boring church? How was that ever going to win her, And I didn't see that because it just sort of was the way I was brought up, and I thought, well, that was the path through to God, even though I hadn't quite found him. Well, I definitely hadn't found him. So when we later were confronted with something far better, we're still dealing with, I was excited by the gospel because I'd always wanted something more. My thinking's always been that if Moses saw the burning bush, and all of a sudden he's in contact with God, if Paul the Apostle all of a sudden has a dramatic experience on the road to Damascus, how come all I have to get, and I didn't think this when I was younger, I thought it later after I came to the Lord, how come all I got was a handshake from an elder in the church? Please give me something better than that if I'm going to be dealing with God. And so Kathy then comes, but she's not coming wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. She's coming under a cloud. Like once she realises what I've brought her to, our wonderful camp at Carricalinga, she then realises that I've trapped her, and I'm just sort of at her mercy a little bit, but I was the driver, so she wasn't going home in a hurry. And we were staying overnight. There was accommodation, for both of us to be able to stay there. And as the next day unfolded, as Kathy's pointed out, the sincerity that she'd never seen before, all of a sudden got her. It's funny, it wasn't sort of the miracles. There was somebody who was injured and a young child, and people prayed for the child, but I think she was more interested in the sincerity than in the miracle, because these people meant business. It's how they lived life. They're on holidays. It's how they lived life, not just what they turned up for an hour on Sunday. And when I look at this story here with Nathaniel, we see him here and he comes with a negative attitude. I know Nazareth. You know, nothing good to say about them. Of whatever experience he's had in life, he's done, finished, doesn't want to hear anything about Nazareth. And then after that it says, Philip says to him, come and see, which I'd like to say was what I did, but I didn't know what I was going to. And Jesus saw Nathanael coming to him and saith to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom is no guile. That's a fairly amazing statement for Jesus, to come and speak like this to a person, because generally he would, you know, people would come to him with a question, he would answer, get to the heart of the matter with them. But he actually comes here with a very positive statement to him straight away, recognizing the guy that he's dealing with. Now, he could have come at him about his attitude and said, what are you so cynical about? And had a fight about his attitude. But he didn't do that. He came and showed something very, very different. And we look in verse 48. And Nathanael said to him, whence knowest thou me? Bang. He's got his attention. No argument here. He's just got his attention. And it goes on, whence knowest thou me? Jesus answered and said to him, before that Philip called thee, when thou wast under the fig tree, I saw thee. And Nathanael answered and said unto him, Rabbi, thou art the Son of God, thou art the King of Israel. I don't know if that makes you tingle, it does me. You see here that Jesus recognizes in this cynical man a need to be known. Not a need to be argued with or dismissed, just a need to be known. And he comes to him and says, I know you. And all of a sudden he's won him without having to battle through whatever had gone on in the past. And so straight away, he has not only accepted that I like this person, he said, this is the Son of God. This is exceptional. And that was what had been said to him to come and see, is this is what you're going to see, but he just completely embraces it. In verse 50, Jesus answered and said unto him, because I said unto thee, I saw thee under the fig tree, believest thou? Thou shalt see greater things than these. And he was going to lead him on into a far better place. Now, a lot of people we know, and some of us maybe, might have become cynical about certain things in life, certain events. Sometimes people have had bad experiences with people or organisations and become cynical. I had a song going through my head the other day, and I wasn't very good at listening to the words of songs back in my days in the world. And I had this boppy little song. I don't know if anybody remembers Needle in a Haystack, that song. Shadoo. So the beginning of it is, well, I once believed all fellas were nice, but girls, listen to me, take my advice. Girls, you'd better get yourselves onto my track, because finding a good man, girls, is like finding a needle in a haystack. Now, I didn't realise when I was singing that as a teenager or whenever I was, that wasn't some boppy little song. It was actually having a go at all of us blokes. And so here's a bit of negativity for whatever reason. And there are people who are in that situation in life. I never want to be with a guy again, because of what's happened. Or all men are evil, sort of thing. And to become cynical. And those sort of things we know can grab hold of people and stay with them for their lives of a bad event that causes them to be cynical. But here we just see what Nathaniel does, and just, how he just so quickly gets turned in something that otherwise would have stayed with him for a lifetime. Stories, events. Yeah, don't get me onto that one. Don't get me started. The things that get deep in people. Let's go to John 20. John 20, verse 24. After the crucifixion. But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came, and the other disciples therefore said to him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said unto them, "Except I see," now we should put our grumpy voice on here, "except I see in his hands the print of his nails, and put my finger in the print of the nails, and thrust my hand into his side, I'll not believe." You're a bunch of liars. Don't believe you, Mr. Grumpy. And for whatever reason, it seemed to be his nature not to accept it, not to accept things from other people readily. When I find out for myself, well, then I'll believe it. I'm not going to accept things easily from other people. In verse 26, and after 8 days again his disciples were within, and Thomas with them. And then came Jesus, the doors being shut, and stood in the midst, and said, "Peace be unto you." Then saith he to Thomas, "Reach hither thy finger, and behold my hand." Bang. He doesn't argue. "Thomas, you've been with me for 3.5 years. Why the bad attitude? You've seen miracles before." He doesn't dress him down and say, "You've got a problem, you've got to get over that problem, your way of thinking doesn't do you any good." He just knows the question that's in him and says, "Here." And immediately he's got to the heart of the issue with him by the way he tries to appeal to the faith within the person. And in verse, we keep reading, "And reach hither thy hand, and thrust it into my side, and be not faithless, but believing." And Thomas answered and said unto him, "My Lord and my God." Same reaction. We've seen it, and sometimes maybe we've been it. We've been stubborn against something that God is trying to show us, and he hasn't fought us. He's just touched us at the right moment with the right information that has just got through, and we go, "Oh, why did I not see that before?" Here I was fighting, blaming, annoyed, arguing, and not getting anywhere with that approach. Why? Because God's not interested in the fighting and the arguing. And in verse 29, "And Jesus saith to him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed." So he had a little lesson for him here in the experience that has happened. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 6. And verse 5. "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." So God has put the universe in place. He's made a beautiful world. He started to have a personal relationship with man, and the whole bang lot falls apart. Every effort he had made and the years that he had spent working with people, trying to get somewhere with them. And it says here, and eventually he's sorry that he's made it. He looks out and sees nothing but trouble. And it grieves him at his heart. In verse 7, and the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Needle in a haystack. Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. That all of a sudden, the Lord didn't remonstrate with them. He didn't fight with them. He said, well, you've all had every opportunity to make the most of this, and you haven't. But actually, by the way, before I destroy everything, I've spotted somebody there that I can work with. And God just doesn't seem to give up. And time and again, through the history of the Bible, we find where people have rebelled against him, and then he's gone, okay, you've had your chance, I'm going to look for another. Somebody whose heart is soft towards me and really does appreciate the things and that I offer. And God doesn't get down like we do and get cynical. He can still see somewhere or other that there is something good that can be done. Psalm chapter 8. In verse 3. The psalmist writing these, I think, well-known words to many of us. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? For thou hast made him a little lower than the angels and crowned him with glory and honour. I won't go on into that part of it, but just the first part. Here the psalmist is just saying, in all of your brilliance, in all of your glory, why did you think about me? There's another psalm just thinking of that I was reading the other day that I wouldn't mind reading as well. Psalm 138, I think it is. Just flick across there. In verse 6. Though the Lord be high, yet has he respect unto the lowly, but the proud he knoweth afar off. Though he be brilliant and busy in all of the things that he puts in place, what is it that allows him to call us by name and to find us and to say, I want you as my own precious one? And I'm sure he wants us to dwell on that. And, in our own nature, we can sometimes think, well, who am I and what is my purpose? But God is so much the other way. I know who you are and I have a purpose for you. So much the reverse of what, where we can be lost. He wants us to be found and to do something so very special for us. And our own stories, each one of them, as we know, are just incredibly unique as to how we've been called. Some of us were called maybe via a family member, maybe even grown up in things, but nevertheless our own calling still happened. Our day where it was up to us to decide, am I going to do this now that I really understand this? And there might be other family members who have decided not to and just said no. But we have said ourselves, but I've had a special calling here. And we know that's what we end up becoming a part of, is that we too come across, the cynical people. And we can get into a battle with them or think, hang on, is this one of those Noahs that the Lord sees in the middle of all of the the things that are happening in the world that actually wants to find grace in the eyes of the Lord. We had fun coming across what I hope is like that. We're driving to Bendigo last year, just talking one of these unique stories, and we were going to sleep overnight somewhere around Nil, and I'm not sure what time of the night Kathy started making phone calls as we were driving, but we just couldn't find a place because I think it was because something big was on in Bendigo, so I recall. And anyway, so she started making phone calls. Everything was full around the towns around Nil. And eventually we found one place in Conniva where one bed left in this little place in Conniva. And then as we were getting closer, about 9:30, the lady rang us back and said, "You serious about this? You still coming?" And anyway, so we were, and we got there, and it was in winter, and it had an electric blanket. So it was very nice. It wasn't flash accommodation, but it had an electric blanket. And the next morning, before we left, we got talking to the lady, and she had a bad cancer that she was going through. We got to talk to her about the Lord, and there was an interest in things, and she was just worried how she's going to keep going on with her responsibilities in life. But what we found out a little bit later on, in ringing back later on, as Kathy did, was that 2 days later, quite unexpectedly, wasn't her that died, but her husband. So here she's still sick as all out, getting treatment. Her husband's gone. So anyway, we've just had the opportunity coming across here to drop in and see her. And we didn't know if she'd be flat out busy. And we had a bit of prayer about it. We got there, nobody there when we got there. Sat down in the breakfast room, Bible out, and went for it for an hour. And her just soaking up the things of the Lord. And we think about these things where the Lord is casting his eye around, as it were, for the needle in the haystack, for the like I say, to the positive one that maybe it's not so hard to him, but we don't know who we're looking for. But he loves finding us. Hebrews 13. And verse 8. Jesus Christ the same yesterday and today and forever. When one of the first times I came along, actually it was shortly after Kathy and I had come, I invited my brother to come down to the camp and bring his wife. And I remember at the time, one of our pastors in Adelaide, who's since passed away, Pastor Rex, he came into the caravan where we were all sitting. And I used to work with Pastor Rex, and he'd witness to everybody in the drawing office where I was working, but I was a part-time student at the time, and I was the only one that didn't get to hear. And so I didn't know him as a Christian at all. I just knew him as a sales manager and a nice fella, but I didn't know anything beyond that. Anyway, so he steps into the caravan and talking a bit with my brother, and I'm just seeing, a guy from work, and all of a sudden he picks his Bible up and wants to show my brother something. He shows him this verse, Now, to me, the Bible was just a book you just didn't know where to start. And he flips this thing open and shows that verse. And I thought, how did he find that? What's the trick to finding things like that in a big book? And it was all so new to me. But gee, it meant a lot. Because I wanted the Jesus that I'd read about, and I wanted him in my life. And I suppose that when we look at, again, perhaps some of the cynicism that is in the world, and people say, and I did too, why so many wars? Where's God? Why do children die? Where's God? You know, et cetera, et cetera. But the funny thing is, people are quick to say that, but not quick to say that that's what people do to each other. You know, a lot of the problems that come on the world is what people do to each other. And Jesus Christ is the same as he was that we've just read about, that would come in to relieve the cynic of his anger and grief, and to give him hope, and to say, has your tree been cut down? It'll grow again. That's what Jesus came to do. Jesus didn't come to make war and to cause problems for people. The children, he took them up in his arms and healed them. That's what he came to do. So Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He hasn't changed a bit. The press on him is not good, but he hasn't changed a bit. And we can have every confidence, as we know, in that's how he is. And fortunately, you know, when we face the cynics, that we, like Jesus coming to Nathaniel or to Thomas, can just come in with the stories that have happened to us that are good. And we don't have to bite in the fight. And take it or leave it, you know. This is how I've found God to be. And whatever sad experiences happen to you, well, come join us, because this is a wonderful way. John chapter 10, just to finish. In verse 11. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. He that is an hireling and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming and leaveth the sheep and fleeth, and the wolf catches them and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth because he is an hireling and careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd and know my sheep, and am known of mine. Little experience I had years ago. I've visited farms occasionally, but know very little about farming. But one time I was driving with a farmer on his property, and we went down to feed the sheep. It was a long journey because, like a true farmer, he did 6 jobs on the way before he actually got to the sheep, and not wasting any time as he went through the paddocks. And when we got there, the sheep just came running across the paddock, and then he dropped his load, and they were all very happy. And as we drove off, we passed some other sheep, and I said, why don't those sheep run to your truck? And he said, they're not my sheep. And I'm thinking, yeah. He said, my sheep know my truck. They know when I come and I feed them. And the other sheep were the other side of a fence. They were somebody else's sheep, fed a different way. And the Lord says here, I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and they know me. And he knows how to give us good food. And if negativity gets a hold of us in some way or other, he says, I've got something for that. You know, that doesn't need to remain. You know, that experience of that some people have of hangry. You know the term, hangry? I'm so tired and so hungry that I'm angry. And maybe sometimes people get to that and they don't even realize that's what they got, and they need some good food. And that's what Jesus knows that we need. He knows how to give us the good food, and to make us so that all of a sudden we're sitting there with a belly full going, that was all right. That'll keep me going. I'm happy. I'm in a good place. You know, there's an old saying, if God feels far away, guess who moved? It's not him. Jesus, the same yesterday, today, forever. He comes to provide the good. The negativity doesn't come from him. It comes from us. Or it comes from other people that affect us. And he says, come to me, and I'll give you good pasture. I'll keep you happy and not hungry. Amen. Leave it there.